This is where he tells a story about his friend Chaerephon, who goes to visit the oracle at Delphi. This is an artistic depiction of the oracle sitting over this crack in the ground where these fumes would come up, and by inhaling these fumes, the oracle would see visions and be able to speak purportedly on behalf of the god Apollo, the god of light and order and proportion, the sun. So Chaerephon's question was, is there anyone wiser than Socrates? And the oracle's answer is no. There's no one wiser than Socrates. Now, this really perplexes Socrates because he doesn't think that he's all that wise. He doesn't think very highly of his own wisdom. So how does he come to interpret this answer to this question, whether there's anyone wiser than Socrates? Well, he decides to test the oracle, which is already kind of a gutsy move because it suggests the possibility maybe the oracle's mistaken. So he goes to test the oracle by seeing if there are other people who are wiser than him. So he goes to talk to people with reputation for wisdom, the politicians. So if people are interested in questions of justice, well, politicians must know what justice is. But he's disappointed because he finds that when they're questioned, they don't actually know what justice is. The poets, they speak great things about the gods and heroes, so they must know things about courage or piety. They must understand these things, and yet when he talks to them, he finds that they don't really understand what they're writing about. They create these beautiful pictures, but they don't really understand the meaning of what they're writing. And finally, he talks to the craftspeople, more common workers, and finds that, well, they do at least have the advantage of knowing their skill areas. But, like everyone else, they have a tendency to assume because they know something that they know a lot about these other areas. And so he's disappointed. And so Socrates' interpretation, ultimately, is to say, well, I seem to be the only one who recognizes the limits of my wisdom, to recognize that my wisdom is worthless in comparison with the wisdom of the gods. That's what comes to be known as Socratic wisdom. Now, Socrates is not saying he's the only one who knows that he doesn't know everything. The other people didn't think they knew everything, but they did think that they knew something about their particular areas, and assumed that they know or they knew what virtue is. That's where Socrates is different. So he commits himself to a life of examining virtue, trying to find out what it is and to try to cultivate it in himself, to be as virtuous as possible. And so this sets Socrates on a collision course with the conventional values of Athenian society. What they cared about was life of wealth and status, power, pleasure. And Socrates is trying to call them away from these things, call them to live an examined life. And so that's Socrates' answer to the perennial philosophical question, what is the good life? The examined life. Life devoted to examining virtue, cultivating virtue in oneself, trying to become as virtuous as possible. Now that does set him on a collision course, as I've said, with Athens, and you know how things end up. He ends up condemned to death, he has to drink hemlock, and yet, while this seems like a defeat, this becomes the example for a whole generation of followers, and for the philosophical tradition throughout history, an example of what the examined life looks like. The life lived according to one's philosophical convictions, no matter where they lead. So Socrates becomes an example of this sort of courage that the philosopher is supposed to embody. When he argues that the unexamined life is not worth living, he shows that to be his deepest conviction, because he refuses to give it up, even at the cost of death.